Welcome to the business of indie games. I'm here with Ed Dille of Fog Studios. Ed is one of the few people who's been in the business since its inception and has 38 years of experience in the games industry. Ed has seen every platform change, every genre, fashion and fad, and the fall and rise of the bedroom developer at least 3 times. And he founded his games agency, Fog Studios, in 1979. He's been involved in over 7,000 game deals, and today he and Fog are more active than ever. It's not often I get to say this, but I'm here today with an industry legend. It's a privilege to have Ed here, and I'm going to be talking to him about lessons learned and how to succeed in the games business long term. Ed, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And I kind of feel like I should drop the mic now and leave, but I'll do my best to live up to it and give a little back to the guys that are coming up in the business now and share what we've learned and what I've learned from others as I've gone along myself over a long and fun career.
Yeah, thank you. And I really appreciate that. You know, over the years, you've seen the industry grow and change, from day one. You mentioned to me last time we spoke that we have entered a renaissance for independent development. So before we sort of get into the nitty-gritty of publisher relations, publisher-developer relations and growing studios, what's your outlook for the current market? What direction do you think the industry's headed?
I think it's a renaissance because the development studios themselves have more direct access to consumers than ever before through digital distribution, through direct channels even a few years ago on console, you could only get 12 independent titles on there a year. Okay. And everything else had to be controlled by a publisher slot. And you got kind of a 1-for-1 for every retail product. You could potentially have a digital product. So now it's all opened up and everybody's got a chance to take advantage of that direct to consumer channel. But there's still challenges for independents to go the self-publishing route because typically they've put every dollar they have into the product itself. And it's not just enough to make a good game when the barriers to entry have come down, okay? There's a lot more product that's out there. I mean, just take a look at what's happened on Steam, for example, going from 1,400 product releases a 3 years ago when there was a green light program to in the last year when basically you could put $100 down and release your game. And there was over 7,000 releases in the same year. Well, consumers still have to sort through all of that, so how do you get, above the noise? How do you get your game recognized? And developing a good PR strategy and being able to market to consumers is not a strong suit of a lot of developers. So it's still advantageous to work with either marketing firms direct who know how to do that, or with publishers to help you do that. So, but also in terms of a renaissance period, you have channels like social media that allow some guerrilla marketing and other things to go on that you didn't have before either. So, it's a good opportunity for young studios to get out there. But I still recommend partnering up to increase your chances of success.
You have an unparalleled experience working with developers and publishers. What are the sort of 3 qualities that you would look for in a new independent?
I think there's 3 gateways that publishers look for when they consider a property. Okay, and then beyond that, there's some qualities of a studio that I can also elaborate on. But the first thing, if you take, let's imagine an RFP scenario. Okay, so multiple studios are going to be pitching a new game about the Transformers, whatever the RFP is that the publishers put out. the first gateway that the publisher is going to look at when he's evaluating those different proposals is who has the best idea for the game. You know, it's the creative spark. There's a lot of people that can put pixels on a screen. If you said to a room full of 1,000 developers, how many of you could make a Tetris game? Most of them would raise their hand and say, yeah, I can make a Tetris game, or I can make a match 3 game, or I can make, I can make pixels move on the screen in that particular pattern. No problem. These are the technical aspects. But how many of them could make one that's successful and breaks out like Puzzle Quest, okay, by combining other elements in a new and unique way? And that is the spark that publishers look for. Something that has a commercial underpinning, okay, but that is extending the genre in a new way, is using the subject material in a creative way, because players are going to resonate with that, and they're going to sell more units because of that. So the creative spark is the first gateway, is who has the best idea for the game. And then once they'll look at that team in that context and say, okay, all right, they got great vision, but do they have the expertise to execute that vision? Do they have the background, and everything to pull this off? Am I confident in their ability to deliver? Okay, so those are the first 2 gateways. The third gateway is price. Okay, now price is not a gateway that is determined typically as in one level across the entire world. Like, this game is worth X amount, for this person to develop it. No, there's a different expectation that the publisher has, because price is driven by geography of a studio. All right. Now, if I have the first 2 things the way I want them, okay, and then the third piece, I'm going to be looking at that studio and the pricing they're putting on that product in the context of what geographic region are they in? And are they in line with what's expected from that region? Is it possible that I don't have the budget to use these guys? Yes, that is possible. Okay. But typically, people will pay more for what they really want. So even though somebody may say in an RFP, I want something, at a budget of $300,000, that never means to me that they wouldn't pay $500,000 for the absolute perfect game that they want. If it was the right creative, the people had the means to execute it, and they were in line with the pricing of their region, and their experience level, right? Because it also is a factor of experience. So those are the 3 gateways by which every project is evaluated, whether it's original or work for hire. Every publisher thinks pretty much the same way when it comes to those 3 things. Now, there's a secondary follow-up that's not asked by you, but it's kind of alluded to, that I mentioned earlier I would get into, which is, this is a small and incestuous business, okay? Your reputation as a developer individually and as a studio is the most important thing for you to guard as you're growing up and gaining experience and interacting and building relationships and everything else. Because put yourself in a position of a buyer now, okay? Okay, I have 2 teams that can both do the work, all right? They've gone through all the other gateways. They've got the creative, they've got the ability to execute, the price is not an issue. Now, how do I differentiate between those 2? All right, this guy here, he's hard to work with. He's very creative, he's very controlling, he's not easy to manipulate. You know what I mean? Like, he digs his heels in on everything. He's a Tom Cruise or whoever, somebody that's difficult to work with in Hollywood. Same kind of an idea. Okay. And then this other guy, he's a joy to work with. You're going to go with the guy with the better attitude, right? Now, if you got two guys with great attitudes and one guy is a 9-to-5 guy and the other guy's a guy who's willing to put in whatever hours are needed to get the job done, who are you going to be more comfortable with? You're going to be more comfortable with the guy that'll do whatever it takes, right? So it's all those little things. How easy are you to work with? How well do you take feedback? How much do you proactively address the concerns of your partner? You know what I mean? I'm thinking ahead. I'm not waiting for you to ask. You know what I mean? If I see a problem, I'm going to flag it to you. That's another mistake that a lot of development studios in their formative years make, which is they assume that the publisher is somewhat adversarial. There's an adversarial relationship between them, and the publisher is there to take their idea, screw them over in the deal, blah blah blah, whatever, and they have to kind of guard their turf and not, because of fear or whatever, not be proactive in sharing any problems that might be going on with the project. Okay. When in reality, this is a symbiotic relationship. A publisher cannot do it without a developer, and a developer really cannot do it as well without a publisher. So you have a mutual vested interest in the success of the product. So anytime anybody sees a potential issue, they owe it to their partner, just like it would be their wife in a relationship or their husband in a relationship, to share what they know and say, hey, this might be an issue. Let's see what we can do to figure it out. So being transparent, having integrity, all of these qualities take a studio that otherwise is just technically good and elevate them, okay, as they begin to build a relationship for being trustworthy, reliable, or whatever. Because what people spend money with and jobs is with people they're friends with and with people that they know they can sleep well at night. They don't have to sit there and worry about, is it going to come off or not?
Just listening to you, my sort of first point that came up was it must be very difficult for new independents to get a break with the bigger publishers and to get their first foot in the door. How would you suggest is the best way for them to go about it? Or can you tell us of some experiences you've had where a new independent has a lot of those values, has a lot of those qualities, but it's really their first or second time out?
Yeah, sure. First off, it's good to manage your expectations up front. Okay. Very few people are going to come out of university and in their first combination end up working with an Electronic Arts or an Activision or an Ubisoft. Yes, there are small little offshoots within those companies, like, EA has Chilingo and things like that, where, yeah, you might get there, but you're not really working with EA proper. Okay. And the reality is, you shouldn't be put off by that. They may make the game that you love the most and that inspired you to go into video games to begin with. But if you look at what's important to a large publicly traded company like that, they need product that's going to move the needle in big ways. Bobby Kotick doesn't pay attention to any project that's not going to make him a minimum of $100 million. It's just too small otherwise for him to expend his time, attention, and resources on, because of opportunity costs. He could be spending on something else that could generate that. So really, you want to target that next tier down of publishers that, maybe they don't have the marketing juice of an EA with retail, but really in the digital world, which is increasingly most of the sales, almost any publisher that has decent marketing can perform. Okay, it's really about how creative are they in their messaging. How well can they expose you in unique ways, Twitch influencers and other things. You know what I mean? That is what you look for. But yeah, if you're breaking in the beginning, you want to, if you can get your smaller project placed to get a little bit of recognition for your studio, that's great and well and good. But don't also discount working with more established studios, okay, to be contributors on their projects, but insist on your credits, okay? Don't get ghosted out. Make sure that your people actually get listed on the credits of the game on Moby and other places, because you're going to need that from a PR standpoint. And then you start rolling up your reputation, because the main thing that we do is word of mouth. You know what I mean? It's like, hey, I got this going on. This is my bread and butter, is my business, is people say, hey, I got this going on. Who do you know that can do why? And it's like, okay, here's a couple, 3 options. And, so, and we're all doing that all the time. So getting known, being visible, being respectful, don't be fanboys. You know what I mean? And by that, I don't mean you're not allowed to love Fallout. I love Fallout. Okay. I could go in my garage and I could bring you a 3D printed gun from Fallout 4. Okay.
Did you print that yourself?
No, my son did, and gave it to me for Christmas. Okay. So, and I get the loot crates. Okay. And you could see the little things on my hat, and, so you're allowed to be a geek. All right. But there's a time for geekery and there's a time for professionalism. Okay. And when you're trying to be a professional game development studio, you can have your moment of, hey, dude, I really respect your work. I loved it. You know what I mean on this? And people dig that. Okay. But then you're onto the business at hand, because the one thing that you have to be mindful of, and it's important for you to be mindful of this with your partners, with your potential buyers, and everything else, is the one thing that none of us has enough of is time. Okay? We don't get it back. We can't buy more of it. All right? And everybody wants it. Everyone is demanding our time. So being respectful of people's time is really, really important, and it's a huge positive indicator of the impression that you leave with them. Okay, if you can have your act together, if you've polished your pitch to where you've got the elevator version, you've got the short version, you can quickly lay it down for somebody and say, do you want to know more? You know what I mean? Because and when's a good time for me to share that with you? Right? There's no presumption in that. It's like, dude, I know that you're slammed. Here's what we're up to. If it's interesting to you, let me know if you'd like to know more, and when can I share it with you? And it's what's convenient for you. Okay. And people go, hey, this guy gets it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. When you've got your PowerPoint together and your video trailer together and your demo build together and your features and the unique selling points together, they know that it's for real.
Yeah. You understand what it takes to make a decision. Okay. And you want to approach people and give them the opportunity to make a decision, because trust me, a quick no is much better than a prolonged maybe. Okay. I have seen studios chase people where it's definitely not going to happen for way too long, and they keep giving them this little incremental update and that little incremental update, like the next thing that they send is going to be the tipping point. Trust me, if you haven't gotten somebody chasing you back after a couple, 3 meetings at most, okay, then it ain't going to happen. So you're plugging a dry well, you know, and uh, that learning that yourself is learning to be respectful of your own time as well. You know, because it's much better if you haven't got a good initial response to something you're pitching, dump it, put it in the drawer. It's not the right time. Go to the next thing.
That's really great advice, Ed. There's so much in there for new developers to learn. Do you have any like examples of developers that have started out from scratch like that and have followed those steps to make it to the next level, as it were?
Well, everybody from Riot on down started somewhere. You know what I mean? Like Steve Faulkner started out working for SSG, and then when SSG was winding up, he ended up forming his own company and going on from there with some of the IP. And it's an iterative process. There's something that you need to understand that's very different about our industry compared to other industries. Theoretically, every game that we make is a sequel to something else. Okay? And I mean, that's just the way it is. Okay? Call of Duty World War II is a sequel to the original Castle Wolfenstein. Nobody owns a genre. Okay? Nobody owns a mechanic. That was all proved in the early days. If there was, only, id Software would be making first-person shooters, right? And only my former client, Westwood Studios, would be making RTS games because nobody else would be able to make them. But that's not the way it works. Now, if you look at every other media form, how often is a sequel better than the original? Very rarely. Okay? As a Star Trek geek, I will tell you the new Star Trek Discovery series is really, really good. Okay? And some people would argue all day long that Next Generation was better than the original. Okay? But these are the exceptions to the rule. Typically, by the time you're doing, Underworld 42, the burning of your ticket, right? It's like nobody cares. But in our industry is one of the few businesses where sequels tend to be better than the originals. And we move in a progressively positive direction. One of my friends, Tony Harmon, okay, is one of the creators of Grand Theft Auto. Well, it wasn't GTA 1 that broke out, it was GTA 3 that broke out. And it was GTA 5 that shattered everything record-wise,
GTA 1 was like a top-down 2D, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, yeah. It was very, very like BloodNet from the old days. Okay, isometric kind of thing. But yeah, it's so we work in a business. We also work in a business where there's very, very people are extremely open about what they've learned. Okay, I defy you to go out here to any other industry and see the same level of openness, okay, where people go, oh yeah, when we made this is where we screwed up, this is what we learned from it, okay, in every respect, all right? One of the reasons I absolutely love this business is that degree of transparency and openness and willingness to share, because there is a philosophy, that rising waters lift all boats. And it's proven out time and time again. If someone comes out with Clash of Clans, it doesn't mean that they've hurt the industry. It means, yes, of course, are there going to be 800 lemmings that try and recreate the success of Clash of Clans and never quite do it? Sure. But overall, every new genre like that brings in more players who become more avid game players. The audience itself grows to the point where now we're talking about, going from $110 billion industry to $160 billion industry in a year, okay, by DigiCapital and certain other things. And by 2020, they're talking about being at 230 billion, which is more than the gross domestic product of 150 countries. So I think we're in a great business, okay? And we're in a business that is going to continue to grow, all right? And it doesn't require magic to be successful in this business. It requires determination, a willingness to work really, really hard, okay? It's been wonderful, by the way. For 38 years, people look at me, even my mother, she never could figure out what I did. They think you sit around and play games all day.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's all you do. And gee, that must be wonderful. When in reality, these are some of the hardest working people you're ever going to find as professional game developers. And most of them are working 60 to 80 hours a week, but they're loving it. They're doing what they have passion for. They're creating something out of nothing, and they're spreading joy and enjoyment to the world. And when you look at the value proposition, it's no wonder that we grow the way we do, because everything else, the price goes up and up and up. The entertainment value stays the same. Okay? In other words, you're going to spend 2 hours in a movie. You're going to spend 6 or 8 hours reading a book. You know what I mean? And you're done. All right? You're going to watch a television program, whatever. You spend your money on Netflix, you watch your TV program. We provide per capita, the per dollar of investment, entertainment dollar that you invest, hours and hours and hours of enjoyment. It is incredibly effective, economical, use of your entertainment dollars. And so what's not to love? You get to do something that creates something out of nothing, that affects a lot of people in a positive way, brings joy to their life, and you get to work with some of the smartest people in the world. As long as you're not a butthead, and you can play and be human with everyone and be real and be transparent, which is really the criteria by which all of us build relationships.
I mean, I'd like to sort of like move on to the next level.
Sure.
With sort of medium-sized studios, because the next step, of course, your burn rate increases, and then you have to sort of manage your studio as a more professional operation than a small developer. But
sure.
Initially, before we do that, can you say anything about the kinds of due diligence that the small independent developer can expect?
As you start to grow, especially, okay, where you start to get the opportunity to work with some of the larger studios that are out there, some of the larger developers or publishers, there's going to be tremendous scrutiny around security, information security, for example, and compliance. Okay, let's use the compliance thing. One of the ways that studios, particularly studios in certain geographic regions of the world where intellectual property law is not viewed with the same degree of regard as it is in the United States and Western Europe, for example, they think it's perfectly fine to use pirated copies of things like Max or Maya or whatever, you know what I mean, for their production. And yet we're working in intellectual property business. Piracy is a real issue. And if that is discovered, I assure you, you will get blackballed. Not only will it cost you the job you're working on, it will cost you things in your reputation that you may never recover from. Okay. And I have seen that be a mistake that is repeated over and over. I have seen another one in the sense that I had this studio, and it was a large studio. Okay. And it was primarily an art outsourcing studio. Okay. So it was more of an outsourcing vendor than it was a full development studio. But they had several hundred people, and it was formed by a former Ubisoft exec. So there was an assumption on my part that this person understood information security and all of those things. And I had arranged, we'd gotten Electronic Arts very excited in working with them. Okay. And so EA went in for a studio visit. And while they were there for the studio visit, they could see on computer screens some of their competitors' work, okay, up that people were working on it. And then naturally they would say, you know, oh yeah, what's that? Oh yeah, this is such and such, and we're doing it for so-and-so, and da-da-da-da-da. And they say, oh, can I take a picture of that? Sure. Click, you know, and whatever. So we're not talking, you know, like back in the dark ages. We're talking cell phone time frame, okay? And of course they came out of their visit and said, we'll never work with these guys ever, because they can't protect. They certainly, if they can't protect the people they're working with now, they can't protect our stuff. We're not going to trust our intellectual property with them, because anybody can walk in there and see anything. Okay. And, you know, there's certain, once you get into the higher level of things, there's outsourcing questionnaire, or not outsourcing, but due diligence questionnaires that can take a week or more to complete, because it gets down into every little aspect of how you do business. And it's really important to pay attention to these things, because that's what they want to see. They want to see what kind of managers you are. What kind of process do you have? How do you work? Okay. It's not just about the end product. It's about how you get to the end product.
There's so much money at stake. They will take it really seriously, and they'll bring as many people as they need to your studio and go through your production pipeline, your process. They want to know exactly who you've got working on your team. They want to make sure they're not working on other people's products at the same time.
Yep. How do you check stuff in and out? What's your quality assurance process? You know, everything. So, and you know, a lot of times, a lot of studios that have worked with smaller and mid-tier publishers are not at all prepared for that. Okay. You'd be surprised how many people come to the table for their first big agreement and they trip over the insurance provisions. It's like, oh, I've never had insurance before. Well, you got to have insurance now. You have to have commercial liability. You have to have professional liability if you're going to work on this contract. Well, I don't even know where to begin.
Very often you have to include the publisher on your insurance now, don't you?
Yep. Yeah. He should be named as an additional insured. Now, some people will make the argument, okay, and I have made the argument, that really is the publisher's responsibility, okay? But at the end of the day, some, depending on who the publisher is, they may not accept that, okay? Their legal department wants their coverage to be secondary and yours to be primary, okay? So you have to be prepared for that expense. Now, if you bid a project if let's imagine, okay, that coverage costs you, I don't know, $15,000 a year, okay, and you've got to maintain it for 5 years based on this agreement. Well, if you don't already have it and you haven't accounted for it in your planning, $75,000 might be what breaks your deal apart. So you have to proactively learn about these things and talk about these things and plan for these things and have plans in place. If you live in a territory where you can't get this domestically, you might have to go to a Lloyd's of London or somewhere to get this kind of coverage. But these are all things that you need to be prepared to address.
Yeah, thank you, Ed. I mean, that's what it's like at the sharp professional end of the business. And so looking into that, as a studio grows, it's going to need more finances, and it's going to need, a longer time horizon. How have you helped people address that over the years, studios that you've represented? How does one go from, being a small independent developer to relying on your publisher as your first customer, and then building an infrastructure where you can take on multiple SKUs, multiple projects, multiple platforms?
Well, I think one of the important things to do as soon as you can do it as a studio is to diversify to become a 2-team studio rather than a 1-team studio. Okay, because a 1-team studio, typically, not only is it entirely dependent upon what happens to that publisher's fate, okay, it also lacks very often the resources to even be able to pitch other titles in the midst of producing the one that's working on, and if you can't have an active biz dev cycle that's supported by creative, at all times, that's a problem. And you're going to find yourself hitting the end of a project going, okay, what do we do now? Or, a perfect example, take a company like Bit Composer, which was going along as a viable company, but then had a problem. And there were companies that were in the middle of development projects with them that Bit Composer had to cancel because they went into receivership, right? Well, at that point, if that's the only game in town for you and your rights are tied up in a receivership for the product you're working on, you can go under as a studio, So being a 2-team studio as soon as you can be is important. And maintaining a biz dev cycle that's respectful of the realities of it, okay? The realities of it is the more you're asking for, the longer it takes to get a deal papered, okay, and signed. So, yeah, if a publisher's coming to you with an RFP, then he already knows, and he's already got money allocated, and he already knows when he wants to start that. So that's going to happen, within a certain reasonable amount of time, provided that you win that. Okay, so you always got to be in a position to compete for those RFPs, okay? But when it comes to OIP, you're asking somebody to fund something that they don't know that they need yet. Okay, so even if they come to the idea of needing it and wanting it, there's still going to be a certain amount of time between that and the point where you actually get to where a contract is drafted, and then a contract is finalized, and then contract is signed, and then money changes hands. You know what I mean? And that process can be literally anywhere from 3 to 9 or even 12 months, which if you're entirely cash flow dependent as a studio on what's going to happen in the next month, you got a problem, right? So having a cohesive biz dev presence, one that, every studio can benefit. It doesn't matter whether you've been making games for 30 years or whether you've been making games for 30 days. Okay. If you've been making games for 30 days, it's going to be hard for you to get a professional representation behind you. Okay. Because they also have to, guys like me have to take into account how easy is it going to be to commercialize these guys. Now many of us will be free and giving of our advice and thought process and everything else. We turn away probably at least 9 out of 10, okay, that approach us that are willing to pay our fees. All right. So, but when we do so, we say, here's why. Here's why. Okay. Here's where you can increase your chances. Here's what you need to do to get to that next level. You know what I mean? And all of the people that do what we do should be willing to do that for you. Okay. And give you some sense of the direction to go in. Now, but once you have having boots on the ground, establish relationships, because first it goes to perspective. All right. As an independent development studio, your relationship with a publisher is different than mine. Okay. He always is going to see you as the talent. With the talent, you never want to piss off the talent. Okay. By telling them their baby is really ugly. All right. Because it's their baby. Right. And that baby may starve to death between then and the next time they see you. Okay. But then the next baby could be beautiful. The next thing they bring you could be command and conquer. Okay. So you don't want to alienate them. So this is the publisher now. So you're going to be polite. You're going to, you might say this isn't going to happen. You might say, let me see the next thing, or whatever. But there's not an efficiency in the communication. There's a stringing along that naturally goes on. Part of it's human nature. Part of it's the nurture of the business, because I want to see what you're going to do later. Okay. This isn't going to happen, but show me what you got later. Okay. Whereas with a firm like mine, our relationship with the publisher is based on efficiency. If there's a potential yes, fine. Let's focus there. Let's see what we can figure out. If there's a no, we're going to get to a no efficiently, quickly, move off, look at the next thing. Because again, time is the one resource none of us have enough of. All right. And they trust us to manage the feelings of our talent. You know what I mean? And not do anything to alienate the talent from them. So it's a very different relationship. So you benefit. All right. Also, because we have multiple, the idea of, okay, you're going to see a certain number of pitches and opportunities come your way as a development studio. It's all going to be based on what they think you can do. Okay. So if you're a racing team, you're only going to see racing related stuff. That's for sure. All right. But point being is you're going to have a limited focus. If I've got 25, 30 studios that I do business development for, all right, plus nobody knows how many other people I know completely, all right, we get viewed as a resource. So we get more things that come to us where people go, hey, what about this? Or do you have somebody who does that or whatever? So we're going to inherently see more than any individual studio would normally see. And there's two types of RFPs that come in, just so you know. There's open ones and closed ones. All right. An open one is literally, I have this game that needs to be made. Who do you have that might be a great fit for it? Then anybody who wants to pitch it in our group who has the skill set for that can do it. Okay. A closed one is, I've looked at your roster. I've looked at the people you represent, and I want this guy and this guy to bid for me. That's where the strength of your materials up front really make a difference.
Also, your reputation, as you've been speaking about.
Yes, 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 yes.
Just to say a little bit about that, I mean, you've got a 20-year working relationship with Steve Faulkner, who
Yep.
created Puzzle Quest. So you've kind of, have you built that relationship from scratch over the 20 years? Have you had more than one hit with him? How's that developed?
Well, first off, I wrote about Steve's products before I ever started working with him because I started out way back in the day as a game journalist also, right? And that you alluded to that earlier. And I did the strategy guide for Warlords 3 when I was at Prima and all that. So we met then, okay, but we weren't working together in this capacity. And then later, when I picked him up as a client in this capacity, he was doing a conversion for Trevor Chan on Seven Kingdoms. So he was primarily working on PC product. All right. And we worked together to transition from PC only to PC console, and from PC console to also mobile, and from premium product to free to play. Okay. And so it was a combination of work for hire and original IP. And when he came along with, Steve likes to prototype over Christmas. Like, things are quiet for a couple weeks so he can actually test a new game idea and be left alone long enough to actually get something, working. So he sends me this Puzzle Quest demo, and I can't stop playing it. All right. It's just really, really good. Okay. And I mean, if there's people out there who do not know what Puzzle Quest is, I will briefly tell you that, it was not the first match 3 game. Bejeweled and stuff like that was already out there. But what it did unique was it took traditional RPG mechanics and it used match 3 as a combat system. Okay. And that was the novel twist that Steve brought to it. Okay. And so we started pitching this property. And I had some people like Tony Pereira, who was at Capcom at the time. He really loved it and wanted to do it, but he couldn't get Capcom Japan to sign off on it because they couldn't make any comps, any comparables. It's sort of like the real estate thing. If you've got a $2 million mansion, okay, in a neighborhood where everything else is $150,000, you can't find comps, and therefore people don't know how to value it, okay? Well, so people couldn't model the game because there was nothing else like it. So I kept getting people pass. And then I'd be calling them about other stuff later. I'd say, Tony, what's going on? Da, 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 da. Yeah. And he'd go, we're still playing Puzzle Quest here in the office. And I'd say, dude, that was 6 months ago. Doesn't that tell you anything? Doesn't that tell you ought to publish this? Okay. And eventually, after 14 months of pitching this game, Brian Christian and Karine Yap at D3P said, we'll take it. Okay. And they convinced the guys in Japan, and lo and behold, it was Mobile Game of the Year. Okay. And it's now a $150 million plus franchise,
Yay.
And it's a wonderful thing. Okay. But sometimes it's really hard to get people to see something that doesn't readily fit what their expectations are of the market. So it's hard to be first,
Yeah, I seem to remember, I was talking with Alex Rogopoulos at Harmonix, who there was a similar story at the beginning of Guitar Hero.
Yep.
Sometimes when you're breaking ground, it's very difficult to get heard. But also, I mean, it says an amazing amount for your and Steve's perseverance as well with that. I mean, you knew you were going to get the deal.
No, I can't say honestly. I always knew I was going to get the deal. Okay, because I have had other product that was simply ahead of market. You know what I mean? And it just didn't come together, right? So you never really know until you know. I mean, I'll write a book when I'm out of this industry called "The Fat Man Sings," you know, but it's really you play it by ear and you do your best. But what I know is always knew that as fun as that game was, if it didn't get made, it was going to be a crime, you know, because it was super addictive and super fun, you know, and it still is. I mean, I playing Marvel Puzzle Quest 5 years after it's released.
Steve's still working on it, isn't he? Turning it to
Yep.
other franchise and stuff like that.
Yep, we got Puzzle Quest 3 coming. You heard it here first. It has not been announced, but
Oh,
yes.
congratulations. Thank you for letting
Thank
us
you.
know that. If you've got the potential to have something that's going to turn into a $150 million franchise, you've got to be really careful about what it says in your contract, right?
Yeah.
And we touched on a little bit on this last time. Would you mind sharing, some of the things that you've come across that independent developers have maybe missed or failed to negotiate, um, or it's been really
Sure.
important that they were picked up? Pitfalls with contract. What about cross collateralization? That's one of the most famous ones, right?
Oh, well, that's certainly one that people a lot of times don't see coming because they don't think about what it means. Okay. The lesson to learn first is always assume success. Okay. You have to look at a contract from the standpoint of the game you're going to make turns out to be the biggest hit ever. Okay. And if that's the case, how would you want to be treated? Okay. And cross collateralization is one of the things that gets to this issue. Okay. Because essentially what cross collateralization says is I can treat the recoupment of multiple products as one product. Okay. Now, I'm going to even back up a little more because I'm going to make the assumption that not everybody in the audience understands recoupment even at this point. Okay. So let's start there and work our way up to where you were going. All right. So I'm going to do a deal with you, Simon. Okay. And I'm going to give you 30% royalties. How does that sound to you?
That sounds pretty reasonable, pretty fair, considering you're the publisher and you're taking the bulk of the risk and the costs.
Okay. Sign here. All right. Now, what did you just sign? You're going to get 30% royalties. How are those royalties calculated? Based on what? And what are you recouping at? Okay. Are you recouping your advance at your royalty rate? Right? So let's say that you are getting 30% royalties of net operating profits. Net operating profits are defined as, okay, the gross profits less everything my mother ever imagined I wanted to make. Okay. So at the end of the day, you get 30% of nothing because I can deduct everything my mother ever imagined. Okay. So you need to understand what are the allowable deductions. So what gets to the actual figure at the end of the day. And the best way to do that is always to say, walk me through it with $1. If $1 comes in the door here, by the time it gets to me, what's left? You know what I mean? And go through each of the deductions. But point being is, so you always need to know what's the net operating, profit that it's the royalties based on. And then how is your advance recouped? Okay. Because let's say for a second that you've got a royalty of 10%, but your advance is recouped at your royalty rate. Okay. So if you took a $100,000 advance, okay, and $1 million of net operating profits came in the door, your 10% relative to that $1 million would be your $100,000 advance that you took in the first place. So the publisher makes the $1 million and you see nothing because your advance, you're recouping at your royalty rate. See what I'm saying? Now, and that's $1 million in net profits. Remember, you have to figure out what profit definition, or net revenues, right? So now we get to the whole idea of cross collateralization. So I make a deal with you to make a game, and I take sequel and derivative rights. Okay. The first game is a huge hit. All right. You not only recouped your advance, you stand to make another $2 million in royalties. It's a wealth of opportunity for you. And I say to you, I want you to make a sequel for me, and your budget is $2 million. Okay. Whose $2 million is being used there? It's not $2 million from the publisher. It's the $2 million in royalties that he was going to give you anyway. Now you have to put into another game for him because your royalties are cross collateralized. You're being given your own royalties as an additional advance on a new game.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's just indentured servitude at the end of the day. That's all cross collateralization does, is it creates indentured servitude. And you end up having to make more games, so he makes more money. All right, and then use that same scenario. If you were on 10% on the first game, and he had, you made $2 million in royalties, that means he made $20 million for you to get your $2 million in royalties, and he doesn't have to give his to anybody. So cross collateralization is a pitfall. All right.
Yeah, really.
The other pitfalls that only come with experience is a lot of people have a tendency to read an agreement, even lawyers, to read an agreement and comment on what's there, but to totally miss what the agreement is silent on. Okay. And that is very often more critical than what is said in the agreement is what is not said. So you really need to look around, have some checklists of all the key terms, et cetera, and then make sure that each thing is addressed as you go down through the agreement. And I strongly recommend that you work with either professional negotiators that understand the video game space or legal counsel that understands the video game space. Very often people start with a lawyer, okay, when they're forming their company that helps them do the documents for forming, that maybe helps them get their copyright registration, their trademark registration, stuff like that. But the guy's a local lawyer, and he may very often, unless you're in one of the major markets, okay, doesn't have expertise on game development agreements. So I've run into these guys all the time, all right, because I don't represent, I can negotiate my guys, but when it says right in my rep agreement, you have to have your own legal counsel to review or whatever, because I'm not legal counsel. I don't represent myself as an attorney, okay? But I run into attorneys all the time that don't understand game development language or attempt to negotiate things which they shouldn't be negotiating. You know what I mean? Like, you don't make an argument for legal venue in Botswana when you're dealing with a publisher who's based in Italy. Okay? You're not going to win the argument. You're just going to piss him off, and you're endangering your client.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So things like that need to be managed. What else? Insurance provisions we talked about earlier. I think the planning for success scenario. Let's go a little bit farther on that. Here's a negotiating framework, okay? That's important. All right, Mr. Publisher, fine. You know, let's assume for a sec, I'm thrilled with my 15-20% royalties, okay? But what if the game sells, what's the number of copies where you would be beyond the moon? Where you would think the game grossly outperformed. And obviously it would be, at that point, it's relative to the quality of the game. It's not relative to the marketing of the game once it crosses a certain point. It's because people really love the game. Okay, so where's that point in your mind? I think if we sold 1.5 million units, that would be amazing. Great. How about if I get a kicker of an extra 5% royalty, okay, at anything above 1.5 million units? Because, you'd be thrilled. Why shouldn't I get a little bit of a kicker if we can reach that milestone? It's an incentive for me to push even harder, So, especially when they think in their minds it really isn't going to happen. And if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. But if you have a success, if you plan for a success, and then you have it, then you feel good about being proactive about asking for it. Does that make sense?
Oh, yes. I can't imagine anything worse than like you actually having a hit after all your hard work and then not having the correct provisions to be able to collect your money.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the other thing to keep in mind is that the number one time when publishers buy studios is when they owe them a lot of money. Okay, they want to recover those royalty streams. So the better job you do in protecting your back end, the greater multiple you receive if that publisher actually wants to buy you to recapture that.
Yeah, that's something that you've done a few times, right? You've worked with a publisher and a developer together and then actually sold them on the developer's behalf, right?
Yep.
That's really a full service that you're offering.
Well, I mean, the ideal thing is you want publishers, you want your clients to be in demand. That's why you don't put yourself in situations where one publisher has essentially a monopoly over your studio. You always want them to have some degree of competition, other publishers sniffing around doing other projects, because in the end, some of the times they buy you because they want to recapture a royalty stream. Some of the times they buy you because they don't want anybody else to be able to work with you.
Yeah.
Because they think your product is that good. And that's certainly the case. That was the case with Westwood Studios.
Before we go, I've got like two more questions. One is
sure.
Like, what advice can you, would you, in summary, what advice would you give to developers starting out now in this landscape? And the second one is like, you've got 38 years in the business. What would you do differently with hindsight?
Let me do the second one first. Okay. And then we'll end on the note of hope. Every one of us has a groaner moment in our life, something that you just didn't see. You know what I mean? And then it bludgeons you, but at the end of the day, it's kind of how we define ourselves also, right? Like I'm a man of faith, and I believe that God needs to bludgeon us occasionally. You know what I mean? Not because he enjoys it, but because it's the best way that we learn certain things.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I get too cocky,
Well, too cocky, too comfortable, too whatever. You know what I mean? It's human nature that can happen to the best of us. Okay? But it's a constant learning process. Well, it is a joy to work in a business where there's constantly new things going on and you're learning and being willing to learn. You know what I mean? Being open to learning, even though you're getting gray around the temples and everything else, I think is really, really important. We never should stop learning. So do I have regrets? Yeah, I regret every time I got bludgeoned, but I don't regret it so much that I wouldn't get bludgeoned again, because those good beatings are what made me what I am today, and increased the value that I can bring to other people. They're the hard lessons learned. You know what I mean? Like I will give you one simple example. When we formed Happy Puppy, okay, way back in the day, which was the first internet gaming site, it was a formative time. It was 1995. The World Wide Web was just coming online. We worked with outside investors, and I learned the important, valuable lesson that it doesn't matter how good your paper trail is and how obvious something is. People with money can make people without money sweat their life away, okay? Because they can say, I don't care what the paper says, sue me. You know what I mean? And fight for it, because they know they got deep pockets and they can wait you out.
Yeah.
And things like that are really hard lessons. Okay? They're bludgeonings, right? And maybe you didn't do anything to deserve the bludgeoning, but you needed the lesson. So I don't regret. I'm happy to say that at this point in my life, I have no regrets. You know what I mean? I wouldn't change a thing. All right? Because it uniquely puts me where I'm at today, and I like where I'm at today. And I like being able to give back. Now, my advice to the youngsters, all right, to everybody, young and old alike, which is this: fairness, integrity, transparency. Be fair to people, okay? And demand that you're treated fairly. Stand up for yourself. Don't let anybody run over top of you, okay? Have integrity about what you say and why you say it. You're allowed to be wrong. We've all been wrong, okay? But be wrong with integrity. Never, ever try and deceive anyone or withhold information or be anything less than transparent, okay? Because in the end, you will lose more than you stand to possibly gain through any deception, all right? If not now, later. It all washes out in the end, all right? And it's the golden rule restated for our business. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And we really live by that. We know who the douchebags are. All right? When they come up, they get branded, they get identified. We all pass around their picture. You know what I mean? all the real people. And we all say, yep, I'm never working with that dude. And these people hang around for a little bit, prey on newbies coming in, but eventually even the newbies catch wind of them. You know what I mean? And they get weeded out because none of us have time for that. We don't have time to deal with dirtbags. If you approach the business that way, you will be remembered as a person who is valuable and who's somebody that people want to work with, given the opportunity to do so.
Thank you so much, Ed. It really is wonderful to hear your experience. And, if others can learn from our mistakes rather than make them themselves, that'll be a great contribution that we've made through doing this.
And then, look, my email address is out there at Dille@fogstudios.com. If anybody listening to the presentation is uncertain about a point, wants to know more, whatever, I invite you to shoot me an email. I'm happy to have a dialogue with you and help in any way that I can.
Thank you so much, Ed. I really appreciate that.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.